first I would like to introduce Robin Mencher, who is the CEO of JFCS East Bay. Prior to JFCS East Bay, Robin served as Executive Director of KQED Education and worked as a Program Director at the San Francisco Education Fund. As an active member of the Jewish community, she has served on the Generations and SF Bay Area Regional Board of Directors of the New Israel Fund. Mencher earned her MA in Education at Mills College and her BA in American Studies at UC Santa Cruz. Joe Goldman. Joe Goldman is the Community Engagement Director for the Western Region at HIAS. Before joining HIAS, Joe worked at MAZON, a Jewish response to hunger, the San Francisco-based Jewish Community Relations Council, and began his career working on several political campaigns and progressive advocacy efforts. Joe holds both a BA in Political Communication and Masters of Political Engagement from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. So now that we've finished our introductions, I would like to turn it over to our CEO, Melissa Chapman, to start this panel. Thank you.
Thank you to Tova, who happens to be the newest member of our team and one of the more incredible members of our team. So thank you for putting this all together and really putting your passions into action. Joe and Robin, it is a pleasure to be here with you and everyone in the audience. This is the first time in over 2 years that we've had a program of this nature at the JCC, so welcome back. All right, we're gonna have plenty of time for questions afterwards, but we're going to get started by asking some of the important basic information. HIAS and JFCS East Bay have been around for a very long time, since the late 19th century, and you've been actively engaged in some very important work around these issues. So I'm hoping you can each share with us a little bit some of the most impactful programs that you've established to help refugees. And I'll start with Robin.
Once again, good evening, everyone, and thanks to the JCC for being such incredible hosts this evening and putting this together, and to our partners, HIAS, for bringing the global and the local perspective together for us all this evening. I want to thank you all for coming. As I look around and see who is gathered here, there are so many people who have firsthand experience with working with refugees, welcoming refugees, going to support refugees abroad, who have all come at a time when we realize this is where we need to show up to. So I'm looking forward to a conversation where we get to hear from everyone here and learn from one another. Some of you know that Jewish Family Community Services East Bay began 145 years ago in the big city to the south here in Oakland, where a group of forward-thinking women at Temple Sinai got together and said, essentially, our relatives are coming from the old country, we better get ready. And that's exactly what they did. And that's where that idea of welcoming people in a way that helps them become self-sufficient and doing it with dignity and care became the signature work of JFCS East Bay. And while we've expanded our programmatic work and our social and human services, caring for members at all stages of life throughout the East Bay, we keep staying steadfast to refugee services. And so if you can think of a major or massive migration effort that have happened in our world, that have brought people to the United States and have brought people to California and have brought people to the East Bay, JFCS East Bay has been a part of it. And we are also known for particular things that we can do in the Bay Area, which is welcome members of our LGBTQ+ community here, so that the dignity and care that we think all people deserve can be honored and welcomed here in the Bay Area community.
I will echo all the enormous gratitude. It is wonderful to be here and to be back in the Bay Area, my old haunts, and see a lot of familiar faces. And so thank you again to the JCC, and my God, JFCS East Bay is, I like to call it one of our crown jewels of affiliate partners for HIAS. Their refugee clients are our refugee clients, and you know, our origins are very similarly timed. HIAS started in 1881, actually out of a direct response to the first state-sanctioned anti-Semitic pogroms in Kyiv. And so we would not exist if not for what is now Ukraine. And we were established out of existential necessity to help people who are fleeing pogroms reach safety and achieve self-sufficiency out of harm's way. And even as we've grown, we are now an agency that spans 5 continents. We're in 17 countries. We're one of the largest humanitarian agencies now in Latin America. And we have operations through partners and our own staff in Ukraine itself, which we'll go into later. But I would say one of the things that, reflecting on the programs and whatnot, the legacy of my agency is that literally you cannot find a single American Jewish family that hasn't been touched by the work that HIAS has done. Because even if you were to look in more recent history, the entire refugee resettlement system, as we know it, was established in the UN Geneva Convention on Refugees in 1951. The US, Israel, and many other countries were signatories. And it established a system in which people could actually flee and achieve safety and welcome, at least supposedly, if their governments who signed the treaty uphold the system. And you would not see the American Jewish community as we know it with Jews from the former Soviet Union, Iran, and we also helped build the state of Israel with resettling in with every wave of Aliyah, including those predating 1951 and even 1948. But literally, you think about the Israelis who live here today, who have immigrated here, we resettled a lot of their parents and grandparents. And so even thinking about the work we do for refugees of all backgrounds, it is part of who we are as a community. And so we are sustaining a system that enabled us to thrive and to exist.
Thank you. We're gonna stay a little bit local for a moment. So as we all know, President Biden recently announced that the US is going to admit about 100,000 refugees who are fleeing Russia. So I'd like to ask each of you how you're prepared to welcome and support newly arrived Ukrainian refugees. And I again will start with Robin so Joe can catch his breath.
Thanks. Well, everyone gathered here, we're on the edge of our seats about when are folks going to start arriving, right? Last week I spoke with one of the leaders in our refugee services team, and they said we've received about 6 or 8 calls for people who are already here, meaning Ukrainians who have made their way into the East Bay to connect or reconnect with family members and are seeking refuge here. The program of resettlement hasn't officially begun yet, so there is an announcement that came from the Biden administration about what will be. If for refugee resettlement agencies, our work begins when the announcement and the news headlines turns into policy and guidelines for action, and then we take our steps. So that's what I meant by we're on the edge of our seats. We know people will come. We know some people are already here. We know that our JFS and JFCS colleagues that work on the US-Mexico border are already taking in Ukrainians who have joined the mass global migration routes that bring people to the US southern border. And we know that a few people are flying in and out. But right now, we're waiting and preparing. So what does that look like? That looks like partnering with JCC on donation drives. It looks like doing briefings like this evening tonight and many others. It means meeting with our friends and partners and community-based organizations. It means joining those great webinars that HIAS puts on, not only for the general public, but for the affiliate agencies, and getting ready. In the meantime, we're still pretty busy resettling Afghans and folks from countries throughout the world. And so we know that when those headlines turn into actual guidelines, we'll be ready to put things in action.
Robin hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways because it is waiting for policies to become actions. And part of the challenge for resettlement of Ukrainians is that the policies that we do know so far is that the current administration in its infinite wisdom decided to not have Ukrainians in the conventional resettlement program that most of us who are familiar with how JFCS has resettled folks are familiar with, and how with government subsidies, for a one-time investment per client to help ensure that there are case managers and other aspects of the work in resettlement. Instead, for Ukrainians, it's a whole private sponsorship program. And where folks people literally go to dhs.gov/Ukraine, fill out an I-134 form. If they have a relative or even a friend, it don't have to be a relative, just someone you know that you want to sponsor to bring here. And so what HIAS is doing, also with our partners at JFNA and a few other national agencies, because we're trying to have this be as coordinated as possible, but as you can imagine, when it's this kind of private sponsorship system, it is a lot of a free-for-all that does not bode well for everybody involved. So, what we are grappling with is figuring out how can you do matching, instead of just needing to be someone with knowing someone all the way. Maybe they've fled Ukraine already, but you don't have to necessarily know them. We want to be able to help with vetting volunteers and the people who are sponsoring, because otherwise you have a huge concern about human trafficking. And so there are a lot of these nitty-gritty things, even with the few policies and actions that are out there, that still need to be ironed out and will be ironed out very, very soon, because I can tell you a lot in the Federation world, we've seen huge amounts of money raised to respond to the crisis, huge amounts. And so one of the things that we're really trying to figure out is how can that funding be distributed to the agencies that are assisting with resettlement, and that's where HIAS can really help with identifying those. And then finally, we have the HIAS Welcome Circle program, which we didn't push in the Bay Area because we have 2 affiliates here. I know that JFCS East Bay has a similar program, but that whole Welcome Circle program under HIAS's umbrella for Afghans was a private sponsorship program in which Afghans opted out of being resettled by an agency and were instead resettled by many agencies. We have 14 in the state of California, 13 of them in LA and Orange counties. We thought maybe there would only be 2 because it's a very time-intensive and expensive thing to do. But we are looking to figure out how can we export this model, because it's not just going to be us, so that folks at the different agencies, as well as people working with us and other partners, can do the same.
Melissa, if I could just throw in there, if you know a Ukrainian who has come to the East Bay in recent weeks or months, and you're looking to get support from them, please talk to us, because we're keeping a list of all of the new arrivals so that when the guidelines come out, we can spring to action right away. And thanks to our incredible work with the volunteers in the community and our volunteer services crew, we're able to give a little bit of assistance in the form of basic needs, toiletry kits, and gift cards for any new arrival who comes until we're able to do more. So please be in touch with us so we can plan for you.
I read a great statistic this morning that the goal from the Federation system was $20 million, and they have just surpassed the $60 million mark for Ukrainian issues, not just local, but overseas as well. Many of you are familiar with some of the mega movements throughout modern Jewish time, like resettling Soviet Jewry, Syrian refugees, Afghani refugees. So both HIAS and JFCS have been through a multitude of these experiences and processes. And hearing a little bit about how the process is changing, I'm wondering how all of your historic work has helped inform your decisions for this particular crisis? What are the lessons learned? What are the most important things that each of you are focusing on?
I would say we have invested in systems that move new arrivals to self-sufficiency as quickly as possible. And that means everything from the role of our finance teams and admin teams to handle getting someone an apartment, right? Sort of the nuts and bolts of things, to mobilizing volunteers to furnish that apartment, to building relationships in the community that help move people to self-sufficiency as quickly as possible. And one of the pieces that we've been really focused on with the Afghan evacuation, where we've resettled hundreds and hundreds of Afghans to date, and by the end of the first year, we think we will have resettled 1,000 people, just our agency alone, is that people are coming here because they have roots and ties here, and anything that we can do to strengthen and support and be a catalyst for the community that new arrivals are being welcomed into from their own community-based organizations and cultural and religious organizations, the more quickly new arrivals will be able to restart their lives. So that's where our focus is. It's about being the conduit to make the connections between different segments of the community that can really weave that network of support.
What I would say on the local level, one of the other things, everything Robin said is exactly what HIAS really emphasizes with our whole network of affiliates and with all the people who are doing our sponsor circles throughout the country. We currently have 32 of them working with Afghans, and so it's a drop in the bucket in comparison to what our agency partners do. But it is really important, and when thinking about the local ties that exist, for a lot of different refugee populations, it gets to the why are they coming to California when it's so expensive, right? And one big piece of that is housing. And what needs to be understood is that housing policy is immigration policy. If we don't build more housing in general, it impacts our ability to find the housing for those who are fleeing here. And this is something that's very deeply personal to me. I have family from Iran. And when I have people coming to me saying, I'm having a hard time affording to live in LA or Berkeley or somewhere else. And by the way, I get it. I live in LA, I live in California. I left Northern California in part because it was so expensive. But I have family from Iran, and I can't imagine saying to them, no, you cannot come to LA, which has Westwood, which is the epicenter of Persian Jewish life for the entire planet. No, I want you to go to Tulsa because it's cheaper, right? That's absurd. And so, particularly for Afghans, who are coming to the East Bay, which for Afghans, East Bay is their Westwood. And so really think about it when next time, there's the whole NIMBY versus YIMBY thing, and I'm willing to go there for this conversation, and I think it's important for you to remember that when you talk about the housing crisis as it impacts locals, it is impacting our ability to welcome the stranger. And then, on the other piece, we're really educating folks on our response on a global scale. A lot of people are really starting to understand the power of cash-based assistance for refugees and for internally displaced people. In fact, there are more internally displaced people in Ukraine than there are Ukrainian refugees. And that helps sustain the Ukrainian economy, and it also helps stave off really terrifying anti-refugee politics in other host countries that have absorbed so many, especially like Poland, which in a matter of weeks absorbed the US equivalent. It would be as if the United States absorbed 60 million people in 3 weeks. And by giving them funding and the agency to buy and address their needs, they are also able to then carry some of their own weight and not seem like they're draining the system. So I can go on, but next question, please.
I'd like to go a little bit off our script. You can hear me too. I've never been told I'm quiet. Tell us a little bit about your partnership. What work do you do together? How do you amplify each other's impact? Are there areas that you each stay away from because the other is doing it? Joe, I want to start with like all the affiliates and how you work with them.
Sure. So really broadly, we have a network of 24, it's 26 or 24, I should know this, over 20 affiliates that do refugee resettlement. And we work, and so in a lot of ways you can think of an affiliate as both the direct implementation and subcontractor. And I know that subcontractor sounds sometimes like a dirty word or like weighted in a negative way, and that's not what I mean by it at all. It's our partner. HIAS is one of the 9 agencies that works with the State Department for refugee resettlement in the United States. And so, and one of the things that I love is that instead of reinventing the wheel and HIAS opening an office in every city in which we wanted to do resettlement, instead, we're like, oh, we have all these Jewish social service agencies in all these cities where we would love to resettle refugees, and they've been doing refugee resettlement for a long time under previous legal structures. But once the whole system as we understand it was established and codified into law in 1980, and we were the designated Jewish agency working on refugee resettlement, we were able to then work with partners like our affiliates like JFCS East Bay. We also have JFS Silicon Valley here in the Bay Area. And so, and with that there comes the disbursement of the funding from the federal government investing in this work. We work on, there are different trainings and resources that become available. And I will say there, I know there's been a long history of, when helping with different aspects of fundraising. When you're looking to do the, funding the work that's happening locally in the community, that should be going to JFCS. That should not be coming to us. And for folks, looking to support the stuff that's happening more globally, or advocacy at the national level and state level, that's also, that would be more through HIAS. But it's very much, we view it as a major collaborative effort. And I'm very proud of the collaboration we have. There are 3 HIAS affiliates in California. JFS San Diego is the other one. And really just, and making sure that people have the resources. And the final piece here on our issues is also asylum, which both JFCS East Bay and JFS San Diego have programs for providing legal representation for asylum seekers. Not every affiliate does that, some just do refugees. And so one of the things that we also do is we do have a national pro bono network that eventually will be able to provide even more support for our affiliates out here in California. They're mostly focused on the East Coast, but that is another resource that is out there for different agencies to collaborate with.
That's exactly right, Joe. And it's one way to think about the local affiliate, like JFCS East Bay, is for a person who is a refugee connecting with the local resettlement agency. It's sort of the end of the line of the process. Most refugees have the status of being a refugee, of being in limbo, of not really having a place to go back to and not really having a place to go to next. They stay in that limbo space for several years. And when they come to us and we meet them at the airport, then they know that they're at the end of the line of finding a path for their new home and restarting their lives. HIAS and the local affiliates like JFCS East Bay work together in a very complementary fashion. So as Joe mentioned, there's a lot of networked learning, training, and sharing, not only from HIAS to the affiliates, but between the affiliates. So because almost all the affiliates who are part of the broader HIAS family are Jewish Family Services or Jewish Family Community Services, we have our own North American network, and so we're sort of a subset of folks who do this really cool work together. And so we have partners all across North America. The other really big piece that I find incredibly helpful in our partnership with HIAS is you're like the middle people between us and federal government policy of Office of Refugee Resettlement and many other federal offices. And so, one, that means we don't actually have to deal with the government directly. HIAS takes care of all that bureaucracy for us, and you also serve as savvy translators and negotiators, so we can focus on our work at hand, which is direct service for refugee resettlement and immigration legal services and comprehensive case management and mobilizing volunteers to get the job done. And HIAS has our back.
That's a pretty beautiful marriage, I'd say. All right, Robin, I'm gonna ask you a question because you have a very extensive media background. We all absorb information very differently now than we did 5 years ago versus 10 years ago, and there may be some generational difference. Sound bites are the way people seem to get information these days. How do you think the media has a role in portraying the importance and urgency of a refugee crisis, and is it being shown to us in a fair, just way?
Well, the hallmark of every good media literacy educator is to ask questions. So, Melissa, what do you think? How's the media doing? You're an engaged and informed member of the East Bay community. Is it all clear to you?
As clear as mud.
So before I came to JFCS East Bay, I'm an engaged community member who's interested in civic life, but I don't have a formal background in refugee resettlement. I care about the issues deeply. I'm moved to do the work, but I didn't come to the work as with the expertise that our colleagues on staff hold and are so great at doing the work. One of the things that I've learned right away is that when we, in the general public, utilize the word refugee, we mean it for anyone who's displaced from their home in any way, who's seeking a new home and to restart their lives. The legal definition of refugee and the way the UN designed it is actually much, much, much more narrow. And so you heard Joe use the term asylum seeker. There's one of those great things that HIAS does is they have like a cheat sheet about basically refugee legal lingo for the rest of us. And I started by just studying that cheat sheet to kind of try to learn all the differences, and I've sat and learned from our legal staff as well. Here's the thing about the media, right? The role of the media is to tell you the latest news, what's new, right? The story of refugee resettlement is a long game. And that means it's very hard to tell a comprehensive story about the arc of an individual's life or the arc of what's transformation that's happening in the world as a result of a conflict in a particular country. And so the language is complex and nuanced. The storyline is way longer than a news cycle. And they're on to the next thing, right? We all know that. So just one concrete example of that, President Biden made the announcement that the US would do something. Even before he noted that 100,000 Ukrainians the US will be open to 100,000 Ukrainians, there's a comment that the US was going to be involved and was going to have Ukrainians back. And immediately we started getting press inquiries and calls and TV spots and radio spots and interviews. This is back in late February. And the questions were all the same. When are they coming? How many are coming? And what can we do, right? How can the public help? And while those are great questions, none of those answers are known. Like, we know that generally what will happen when they come, because we've been in this business a long time, and we know generally how people can help. They wanted activation to happen immediately. And guess what? We haven't heard from them again, right? So that tells us that that's why Joe has a job, to engage the public in the long arc story of mass migration. And I think as engaged community members and citizens, we all can go back to the media, and it's an interactive place now. And we can engage our favorite journalists online, through social media, through an old-fashioned letter, and ask for these issues to stay on the front burner. As a media literacy educator, I actually know that that does make a big difference, right? That engagement that you have with the media to keep the story at the forefront happens if you ask for it.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you, Robin, and ditto on a lot of the things you said. I want to add a piece to it, which, given where the media does a massive disservice to our understanding, and I want to add, I did not know the difference between a refugee, an asylum seeker, internally displaced person, what TPS stands for, which is temporary protected status. I didn't know any of that until I started working at HIAS about almost 3 years ago. So, you know, it's our immigration system as a whole, whether you're fleeing for your life or seeking to come here to have a better life, it is designed to keep you out. And the media is set to be confrontational, and in a lot of respects. And what I mean by that is that whenever we have a change in our asylum processes, there is a trigger that goes off where the media loves to show, you know, a whole bunch of people who are trying to exercise their legal right to seek asylum, who are predominantly brown and black, and it scares the bejesus out of a lot of white Americans every time they see a picture, no matter what the context is. And I think the media really loves to have a border crisis, even when said crisis is created by our own policies. And we are seeing a bipartisan opposition to improving our asylum processes because we're in a midterm election cycle. And it's incumbent upon us to think about what the reactions are and what we're reading, and why is it suddenly a story when people are trying to exercise what was unanimously codified into law in 1980, unanimously by Congress, which is you have up to a year to be in this country and exercise your right to seek asylum. I didn't know that until I had this job. Most people will never know that. And so the media is not telling us that. And in fact, even some of the best journalists out there are not telling us that. I spent 2 hours with a journalist from the New York Times last month. And after reading many of her stories, and they are good, she knows what she's talking about. Even there, at the New York Times, it's not coming through.
Would folks find it useful to have some of this language, and we could ask Joe for a copy and send it out afterwards? Yeah. Okay, all right. And we'll take questions at the end, so in about 20 minutes. Joe, you have been working at the intersection of Jewish community and social action for quite some time. And Robin, I'll offer this question to you as well, but how can our Jewish values and traditions help uplift refugees right now?
As many of you may know, we are commanded in the Torah to welcome the stranger no fewer than 36 times. That's more than any commandment by any stretch. And you look at, you know, a lot of our core values like B'Tselem Elohim, that we're all made in the same image. The command Tzedek, Tzedek, Tzion Dov, justice, justice, you shall pursue. And forgive me, I know you're East Bay, so you know this one. Tikkun Olam, to repair the world. I know it gets used a lot and sometimes feels really stale after you say it so many times, but it's true and it's part of who we are. I think a lot about, especially with, I'm going to use Ukraine as an example, because the past now over 2 months, our community has had a binary conversation around this, because it is home to 200,000 Jews. For Ashkenazi Jews, a lot of us have ties to the region. Our ancestors fled. And we know that had our ancestors not fled when they did, and they somehow escaped the Nazis and the Soviets, that those Ukrainian Jews could be us. And so there is a big push to emphasize just help the Jews. But I also think about President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, who, like the majority of American Jews, is married to a non-Jewish person. A majority, of my generation, as a millennial. I can't speak for baby boomers, but I think Gen X and younger, the rates are very high. And he is very proudly fighting for his diaspora country, fighting to save the lives not just of Ukrainian Jews, but all Ukrainians. If Zelensky can fight for all Ukrainians, and then for our conversation purposes, all refugees and displaced people, then so can we. Because this is who we are. And we also know the painful history of having to stand up for ourselves when no one else did. I'm not dismissing that. It is a both-and conversation. And so a lot of this is part of our values. And I think we have a lot of people within our own community who are traumatized by our history, and I understand it. I'm someone who fought the BDS movement here in the Bay Area for 5 years. I really get the polarization and feeling of alienation. But that doesn't mean we walk away. And this is a tension that we at HIAS have to contend with every single day, because it is an ongoing conversation with the Jewish community about why we do both. Standing up for everyone does not mean we are excluding our own people.
So I'm going to agree with you and also raise it a bit, which is, we talk about tzedek tiradov, right? Tzedek, righteousness, justice. As Jews leading this work here in the East Bay, nationally, throughout North America and globally, we have an obligation to focus on our intention, our motivation for why we are doing the work, right? And that's about recognizing the interconnectedness between all people and recognizing that through serving refugees and helping them build new homes and new lives, we're making our world a more just place. And so that's where the personal family resettlement intersects with housing policy, immigration policy, global politics, and where we land as community members and community leaders. So it's about that intentionality, that shift from I'm going to do X to feel good about helping someone less fortunate, to supporting the vulnerable, to recognizing that we all have a role to play in bringing about a more just society. On top of that, I would add, there's in the either or binary world, there's the helping the Jews of Ukraine, there's helping all Ukrainians. But back to that media discussion, those of us in the deep media analysis world also recognize that there was a pretty big backlash at the start of this war in Ukraine and the way in which the media was covering it, because not only was it the new shiny thing to talk about, but Ukrainians who are suddenly under attack look a lot like US journalists. And that meant that there was a lot of bias about what stories were being told and what stories were not being told. We're in year one of a 5-year evacuation plan that the US Department of State has for Afghanistan. We are going to see more Afghanistans being resettled in the next 3 months in the East Bay than perhaps the total number of Ukrainians that will come to the East Bay. Not many of us here gathered tonight have as many historical, deeply rooted connections to the people of Afghanistan. And that's okay, but as we move through our world with a sense of justice for everyone, it means taking a little bit of a step back from the headlines and remembering why we're in this work as Jews.
I have one small piece to add. in LA, where we've had the epicenter of our welcome circles, so over a third of them nationwide are there. What has been incredible, and remember, LA is one of the largest Jewish metropolises on the planet. Having rabbis come to me of very robust congregations, coming to me and saying, after they welcomed an Afghan family, and they're saying, this is bringing Jewishness to our shul. My congregants are remembering why they are Jewish. They are remembering why they come here. Because it cannot be just for the sake of continuity, which I know we have understandable anxiety about. But this is addressing that exact issue, because they are now having a lot of the same younger generations who maybe they joined to send their kid to the preschool. But now that their synagogue is welcoming refugees, they are way more engaged. They've been more engaged in their synagogue in the last 6 months than they ever were. And so I think that's a message around, why it's so important, and even getting beyond those headlines, because it is that meaningful, direct action as to who we are as a people.
Absolutely. So I feel odd asking this after both of your comments, but I am curious to know if you found that some of your clients who are survivors are going through additional trauma or need additional support right now, and if so, what might you be doing?
100% that's accurate. Unfortunately, I'm sad to have to report. Many folks gathered here this evening know that it is the Jewish Family Community Services in communities all across North America who are charged with caring for and honoring and respecting the Holocaust survivors in our midst, in our communities, to make sure that they are cared for and are able to age and be supported through the remainder of their days on Earth. Here in the East Bay, we take care of over 250 survivors and also support their family members and the next generations along the way. A large group of the survivors who are with us here in the East Bay come from the former Soviet Union, have ties to or grew up in Ukraine, or neighboring areas who've lived through similar experiences. About 3 weeks before the war officially began, the bombings began, the anxiety levels of the survivors in our communities began to be elevated, and we started seeing some familiar patterns from client to client to client. Our amazingly skilled and loving team of social workers and case managers and mental health professionals started working with our survivor clients one-on-one and with their families to check in with them individually, and then to also start bringing them together to build community and talk about their experiences virtually, of course, at this point, given their age and the health of and their health, and we continue to provide an elevated level of support and case management to as this war unfolds. People who have experienced trauma at very early ages then live their lives in a pretty different way than other folks, and so and the elders in our midst are holding those memories of war and invasion. I will say one other thing, which is I've seen in the office the way that the staff members who are from the former Soviet Union have a common history with the staff members at JFCS East Bay, who are longtime resettled folks themselves from Afghanistan, because many people have the shared experience of seeing the Russian tanks roll into their town squares. And I've been able to experience, in the midst of all of this horror, a new kind of connection and kinship among our staff.
Is, we are not serving our survivor community because we resettled them, but what I will say, without question, we are seeing, we tend to see this whenever a major crisis is in the headlines from a lot of our supporters who are survivors and former clients, where there is, a surge in donations from them and inquiries of how to help, even people who are, in their late 80s, early 90s, and what has been really fascinating is just, even though it is anecdotal, then, I've been at events like this now, I've almost every week, multiple times a week since February 24th. And at least in Southern California, I encounter at least 1 or 2 survivors at an event every time. And what has been fascinating is, while the PTSD is so strong, and you can, if you have any emotional intelligence, you can feel it in the conversations. Going to the conversation earlier about, helping Jews and non-Jews, there has been a very universal thread in which they kept saying, just help get anyone out. If they're giving a donation, they say they add that. It's not something that I even would bring up, but they say, it doesn't have to be Jews, just get people out. We know what this is. And that has been very, very impactful for me to hear that from multiple survivors who have, lived through experiences that I will never fully understand.
Going back to talking about media and everyone wanting to jump into immediate action, I have a feeling everyone here still wants to be able to take actionable steps to make a difference. So we need your help. How do we break through the noise? Besides buying those amazing socks you're wearing and supporting HIAS, or recently attending your amazing gala, donating to the drive out front, what can we do? Should we be talking to the media? What are the actionable items that don't get in the way but actually support your most urgent needs right now? Easy question.
The first piece is advocacy, and the terrifying news about our Supreme Court has sucked the oxygen out, and with good reason. It is absolutely terrifying. And we can walk and chew gum at the same time, at least for now. And with that, that there is that advocacy and reminding our elected officials how much we care about this issue, demanding that our state legislators really step up the level in which the state can invest in this work, in supporting affiliates like JFCS East Bay, because there are a lot of things that our state and local governments can do that have zero bearing on whatever balagan and mishigas is happening in Washington. But they don't know to do that if they don't hear from you. And especially for all of you who are constituents of the budget chair in the state Senate, Nancy Skinner, you have a lot of clout and a lot of power, and you need to exercise it. So that, I would say, that's a big piece right there.
Yes, and with the beginner's mind and newcomer's eye that I brought to refugee resettlement, and just a few months after I started my role, the U.S. military withdrawal from Afghanistan took place and the evacuation. And what I very quickly came to understand as we moved from resettling a trickle of families, just a handful here or there during the Trump administration, to I don't know, a river, a waterfall, a tsunami, think of your favorite metaphor, is people who are displaced by war that the U.S. has been involved in and then given an opportunity to resettle in the United States are in a very different position than the folks that the United States contracts with to be prepared and initiate global policy and military actions around the world, just from a budget perspective. So every time a new arrival comes to our community, we get a tiny bit of money to run the program and a tiny bit of money in direct assistance. And Joe, do you know how many years it's been that that tiny bit of money has been the same? A decade, 2 decades?
At least.
Right? So this system is designed for the community to see the pictures in the paper, online, on TV, and open your hearts and open your wallets and give to your local community organization as a disaster relief effort. It is impossible to do the work without community support for it. Time, goods, and money. It is designed that way. And so that is what our community needs, that's what every community needs, because it's not possible to meet the needs without it, right? And so here we are in the nonprofit third sector world, making up a tremendous gap between the allocation of taxpayer dollars through the federal government to what's really needed to restart one's life. I'll stop there, otherwise I'll be soapboxing even more, and I'll turn it back to you, Melissa. But I have a lot more to say on that.
Well, we'll have some time in the Q&A portion, which we will open up momentarily. First, I just want to say thank you. I'm humbled to be on stage with two incredible leaders, and a thank you to everyone who's here. We're so fortunate to have this incredible work happening. So now, who has a question for one, both? Please.
So I wanted to make sure I understood you correctly. Joe, is that your name? The resettlement of Ukrainian folks that may come here will be through voluntary private sponsorships. Perhaps families will be sponsoring these refugees. So therefore, HIAS money, the federal money, will be coming to these families to help. And also, again, I know you don't really know all the toughness details, but how can a person in this audience really help other than donating money?
So first, there will be no federal money coming to help
No
with resettlement
federal
of
money at all.
Ukrainian refugees. And then I use that term loosely because they actually legally will not be refugees. They will be humanitarian parolees, which is, I'll spare you the details on that for now. But what you can do beyond the money, maybe I'll paint a picture at least for what the HIAS Welcome Circle would look like. And I know it would look, I think, somewhat similar to what has happened with JFCS East Bay. I just don't want to speak for them. You know, a HIAS Welcome Circle is usually a group of 5 to 8 people affiliated often with a Jewish organization, whether it's a synagogue, it could be the NCJW chapter, or any of those sorts of things. And they will go through an hour and a half, 2 hours of training, and they also have to agree that they're going to be doing everything from helping a family with enrolling kids in school, finding housing, and finding housing, and enrolling folks in the different public benefits to which they qualify, vocational training, and furnishing said housing. All of those things take time and talent. They don't just cost money. In fact, every place, you know, we work for our welcome circles. The circles raise $20,000 each. That money does not go to HIAS. That stays in-house to help support the resettlement of the families they're working with. That's a lot more than what the feds give. They had a very easy time raising that money. The hardest part was finding housing more than anything else. The language barriers. California is the best state for Afghan resettlement in particular, and also anyone who speaks Russian, because we have everything translated into Russian, Dari, Pashto. It becomes a lot harder when there's another dialect involved, which has happened. But it is something that people whether you have a group of people that has a social worker, someone who maybe has experience in education or medicine or just someone who's a go-getter who is good at dealing with bureaucracy and navigating all that. And a lot of it also can be done from the safety of your home if you're worried about COVID. There are welcome circles where the family has only met, 1 or 2 people from the whole circle, but it's the whole community, because it's not just the 5 to 8 people from a synagogue, it's the entire synagogue community or the entire NCJW chapter and their synagogues and their JCCs. So it's something that, to what Robin was saying about the direct service side, there's a lot that you can do once we get those final details finalized.
So at JFCS East Bay, that means you can go online and hit the Get Involved button on our website and fill out a very simple questionnaire where you provide your contact information and what you might be interested in doing in terms of volunteering your time. And then our amazing volunteer services team sorts through and collates all of that information, makes contact, and then puts you in the queue to be at the ready.
Thank you.
I saw George, Susan, I don't know your name, ma'am. Susan too, and then the gentleman with the hood. So we'll start George.
First, Melissa, thank you and the JCC board and staff for putting this together. I think it's exactly the kind of vital work that the center, the JCC, could be doing to get the word out that Joe was talking about, the message that Robin and Joe have brought this evening. So kudos to you guys. That's terrific. I have actually 2 questions. One to you, Melissa, and one to Robin. I wasn't clear on when you said was it 20 to 60 million dollars. Was that the local federation?
It was the federation system. I don't
nationally.
Nationally.
Now, how will that money get put into the Robins, the Joes, to give them the staff that they need, the resources that they need, because $60 million ain't hay, and that can go a long way to translators, to train social workers and help people. So hopefully that's going to get into the system.
We would certainly hope so, and each city's federation operates very differently. In Chicago, 50% of the money goes overseas, 50% stays local. Here, the formula is very different, and there isn't traditional unrestricted agency allocations. It's very specific based on impact or a donor's interest. So I don't actually know if you're going to receive a local federation allocation. My sense is probably not. And that the majority of the dollars federations are raising are going directly to the Joint Distribution Committee, which is really the Jewish community's overseas arm that deals with rescue and relief.
May I think, what I will say this, I don't have all the exact details, but I do know that my vice president is in regular conversation, probably 5 or 6 times a day now, with her counterpart at the Jewish Federations of North America, trying to figure out exactly how this is going to look. And again, a lot of the issues have to do with the fact that it's rooted in policy, and that then lead to all the other conversations about how do you properly fund the implementation of this. And it kind of, and that piece goes to why advocacy is so important. Because you can have all the money in the world, but if you can't have a policy implementation that makes sense, it gets a lot harder to make sure that those dollars go to the right places at the right time to help refugee populations.
And the other question is for Robin. In the Afghans, because you're already very involved in the Afghan stuff, is there any percentage, a tiny percentage of Jews that have come out of Afghanistan?
Not to the East Bay.
There have been 0.
Not
Yeah.
these, but
There was 1 Jew left when Kabul fell in the whole country.
I have been told we have time for one more question, so Susan number 1. And maybe if I can ask for the kindness of my partners, maybe Susan number 2 can also have a question answered.
So Joe, my question is, I'm hearing that the status of the Ukrainian, whatever their designation is not clear, that they may not have the ability to stay after 2 years' time, and that there may be, that might be an impediment to receiving those social services that you were indicating, like enrolling in school, getting medical aid, all those services.
So there are Ukrainians with all different types of statuses right now, because there are Ukrainian asylum seekers.
Yeah.
There are those seeking temporary protected status.
Right.
And then there are the humanitarian parolees who would be through the private sponsorship program that we mentioned. The good news is that, especially in California, it does not matter what their status is. They can go to school. A bunch of us were lobbying at JPAC in Sacramento for programs like Healthcare for All, which, although originally designed to really expand Medi-Cal access and eligibility to those who are undocumented, one of the pieces that we are pushing for would also be to just remove the immigration status period, because undocumented is a status.
Yeah.
And that would remove that barrier. However, Congress did today, and it may have just been the House and not the Senate or vice versa, approve funding for Ukrainian humanitarian parolees to be eligible for food programs like SNAP and also for Medicaid, which is a huge game changer, because then otherwise if you're hosting Ukrainians and if you're on the hook for their medical bills, that's no fun. That's no fun.
And employment?
And then work authorization, though, I need to double check with Congress if they did approve immediate work authorization, because otherwise that has to go through the immigration courts, and it could be several months before they get work permits.
But as you can hear, it unfolds piecemeal,
Yeah.
right? And it takes a lot of energy to stay on top of it and then figure out how we can be as responsive as possible as the situation unfolds.
Instead of just using the regular refugee resettlement process, you can see why we were not giving you all straight answers, because it's a mess.
One last question, please.
I'm part of an informal welcome circle that's involved with several Afghan newcomer families. These families have already had their several months of services, like JFS provides. And this is mainly for Robin, but for both of you, what our volunteers, I'm a retired social worker, and I still spend hours just trying to figure out the systems. And what I'm really wishing for, I'm wondering if JFCS or HIAS has any kind of information and referral, or has information bank, so that I don't have to try to figure it out from scratch, stuff that your caseworkers already know.
Do you have materials state by state for the welcome groups?
We don't have materials state by state. That would be awesome. And that actually is something we're starting to really push our partners at JFNA to really help us with, because they have a lot more staffing and funding capacity on the policy front, because it's also a policy issue. But what we do have for our welcome circles are a number of resource guides, and I'm happy to share this in the follow-up, that are really great checklists of, like, these are all the different types of things to be looking for, and these are probably what they're called in your state or in your community. And where California particularly gets a little messy, and this is why partners like JFCS East Bay are really critical, is that California has a lot of state programs that are implemented by the county. And so one of the biggest, and I know, and I know that has at times been an issue in places like the Bay Area, because there are 7 counties, and so you have, JFCS, you cover Alameda and Contra Costa. You're not resettling in Sonoma. But, and so, we've had circumstances where even, helping with our welcome circles in Southern California, where we have a fantastic circle in Long Beach. Well, Long Beach is right on the border with Orange County. It's in LA County, but it's on the border with Orange County. In Orange County, all the programs have different names, they have different this and that, and so it is very localized. But that is a really great issue that you raise, because people are encountering that.
So at JFCS East Bay, our refugee resettlement case managers take on all of the basic signups for services. It's part of our requirement as a resettlement agency. And then we work with our welcome teams, typically on areas that are less about the knowing the county person and the bureaucracy, because it is complex and takes a long time to train on. And isn't sort of the best use of anyone's time. So we actually have pulled back quite a bit more recently and having volunteers take on those responsibilities. There are always more and more services to connect folks to, and once our 90 days of resettlement come up, expire, our case managers stay connected to our clients for much longer, but you're right, there is a little bit of a shift where community volunteers get more involved and engaged. At that point though, it's less formulaic because it's not the basics, and it's more individualized to serving the needs of that particular family. So it's hard to have a sort of easy to go to guide for it. If they're a JFCS East Bay resettled family, then that is something that we can help bridge that information gap through our case managers and our volunteer services team.
I want to thank everyone for being here. Civic engagement is a priority of this organization. Help us spread the word. Help us support our partners. Feel free in the next week to drop off items out front. We will send you an email in the next day or so with some of those actionable items and resources. Thank you again to Tova, to all of the incredible team here, Natalie, our facilities director.